It gives me immense pleasure to introduce this young and diversely talented group of optometrists to the national and global experts in the field of vision science research. They will be discussing about their research projects during the final year of their undergraduate study. They are currently undergraduate students pursuing their bachelor's of degree at Institute of Medicine, Tribhuvan University, Nepal. I would also like to encourage our expert panels to share their constructive comments regarding the topic with the presenters so that they can further uh, better their research and pursue their career in the vision science. So without further ado, I would like to formally begin the session. So shall I begin the session, Kapil?
Yes, please, sir. Just ask the Subedi and then we
So
can start here.
are our participants ready? Okay, let's begin. They are here. So without further ado, I'd like to formally begin the session. First of all, I'd like to introduce Ms. Asta Subedi. She is going to have discussion on topic comparison of high order aberration with different refractive errors in school age children. Hello, Ms. Subedi, are you here with us? Ms. Subedi, are you here with us?
Hello
Can you
everyone.
hear us? Hello.
Yes.
Warm welcome to our
Yes,
virtual
I'm listening.
conference. We're looking forward to hearing from you. The podium is all yours now. You can begin your presentation. Are you ready? You can share your screen now.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for providing this opportunity to share about my project in this conference. Now I'd like to begin my project.
Your screen is not visible to us.
Hello.
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 Yes, your screen is visible to us now.
Is it visible now?
Yes, it is.
Hello. Is it visible?
Yes, it is
Yeah.
visible.
And the topic of my here it goes. The topic of my project is the effect of cycloplasia on high order aberrations. The aim of my study is to compare the corneal high order aberrations in school age children before and after cycloplasia. The methods and variables are, it is a hospital-based and cross-sectional study. 75 eyes were enrolled and different components of corneal high order aberrations were measured using Von Cirrus corneal topography machine. And in this study, we have done cycloplasia before and after, and the readings and the different components of corneal high order aberrations were recorded before and after cycloplasia. And the and the cycloplegic drops were cyclopentalate 1% and tropicamide 1%. First of all, cyclopentalate 1% followed by 1% tropicamide and again cyclopentalate 1%. And this is the instrument which I have used during the project. And it is Von Cirrus corneal topography machine, and this is the format of the readings. The results. Comparison of high order aberrations before and after cycloplasia in different accommodative state. Pre and post cycloplasia, the effect of cycloplasia in high order aberrations. Keeping pupil size constant, I have taken recorded two pupil size, that is 6 mm and 8 mm. In 6 mm pupil size, different components such as optical path difference, root mean square, total high order aberrations, root mean square, coma, root mean square, spherical aberration, root mean square, likewise trefoil root mean square, quadrifoil root mean square, and secondary astigmatism root mean square, likewise point split functions, which is measured in terms of Strell's ratio. Now, and different these high order aberrations, were recorded before and after cyclopesia, and the mean and standard deviations were noted down. There was no any statistically significant difference in before and after cycloplegic results. I have used peer t-test and Wilcoxon sign rank test according to the category of parametric and non-parametric group. Likewise, in 8 people also, there was no any statistically significant difference in before and after cyclopesia, that is in normal accommodative state and in cycloplegic state in any of the high order aberrations components. And the results were there was no any statistically significant peer differences, p-value greater than 0.05 between any components of high order aberrations in different accommodative state, that is before and after cyclopesia, in fixed 6 as well as 8 pupil size. The conclusion of my study is there is no significant effect of accommodation in corneal high order aberrations. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Swedi. It was a wonderful presentation. As you have stated that there is no effect of accommodation in high order aberration, that is indeed an insightful finding for us. That would be useful for us in the clinical practice as well. Thank you for presenting your research findings with us. Thank you again. Next up, we have Ms. Anita Paudel. She is going to have discussion on topic utility of MChart for the diagnosis of meta. Sorry, let me check her topic. Ms. Anita will be discussing about the quantification of metamorphopsia using the MChart using among patients with macular diseases. So Anita, are you here with us? Are you here with us, Ms. Paudel? Seems like Ms. Anita Paudel is not here with us. So let's move ahead. Next up, we have Mr. Ayush Chandan, who will be talking about the possible effects of smoking on the meibomian glands. Mr. Chandan, are you here with us?
Hello.
Hello. Mr. Chandan, are you here with us?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Warm welcomes and greetings to our virtual conference. We are looking forward to hearing from you. Here, the podium is all yours. You can begin your presentation now. You can start sharing your screen.
Is it visual now?
Not yet. Yes, your screen is visible now.
Okay.
Okay, you can begin your presentation.
First of all, I would like to thank Midwife Foundation for giving me the relevant time to present my research topic here. My research topic is meibomian gland count in cigarette smoking males without meibomian gland dysfunction. As we all know, cigarette smoking is currently a severe public health issue, which contain more than 4,000 of compounds, which can cause several eye disease like ARMD, anterior-ischemic optic neuropathy, thyroid eye diseases, through different ischemic or oxidative mechanisms. Similarly, MGD is one of them. And also nowadays, infrared imaging, which uses wavelength of 700 nanometers, can estimate meibomian gland loss, which is one of the causes for the dry eye. The objective of my study was to measure the meibomian gland loss and tear functions in smokers and non-smokers. The materials and methodology in my study was an analytical cross-sectional study where the smoking population contained male with history of smoking of greater than 1 year attending the Korea Alliance Center for Ophthalmic Study without MGD. And similarly, 25 age-matched non-smoking males were included in the study. The mean age of the smokers was 30.90, while non-smokers was 29.28. In the smoking population, the mean pack per year usage of cigarette was 6.94. The assessment tools used in my study were OSDI questionnaire, non-invasive breakup time with both styrostopography, Thurmer second, that is with anesthesia, with a standard filter paper, and mevography with bone styrostopography. The result of my study is as shown in the table. We can clearly see the significant value in OSDI score, Thurmer second, and loss in upper lead of the meibomian gland with p-value of 0.04, 0.03, and 0.01 respectively. Similarly, non-invasive tear breakup time and lower lead mevography did not show much significance in a smoking and non-smoking group. Here we can see the scatter plot diagram, where we can see that a significant positive correlation was found between loss in the meibomian gland in upper lead with OSDI score. So coming to discussion, several mechanisms have been suggested to explain the negative effect of cigarettes on ocular surface. It has been discussed that cigarette smoking triggers the expression of pro-inflammatory mediators like tumor necrosis factor alpha, interleukin 1, 6, 8, which suppresses the anti-inflammatory mediators like interleukin 10. So there was a significant loss on the upper lead mevography of the smoking group compared to the control group in the study done by Muafiz et al. Here the upper lead mevography shows more loss than the lower lead mevography. It can be because of that the smoke particles in the air move counter to gravity, and the meibomian gland in the upper eyelid can be therefore expected to be more affected. Similarly, the OSDI score and meibomian gland loss had a positive association in the study done by Pault and Wade. And similarly, smoking has a deteriorating effect on the lipid layer of the corneal tear film, which can cause evaporative dry eye. So in conclusion, my study concluded that the loss of meibomian gland in the upper lid is observed in the smoking group than non-smoking group, which was correlated with OSDI score. The limitation of my study is that we did not access the risk factors for MGD such as age, occupation, like commuter vision syndrome. I would like to thank everyone for joining with me, and I would like to acknowledge Mr. Gauri Shankar Shrestha sir for his kind guidance during the making of this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chandan. I found your study findings quite thought-provoking. So according to your findings, smokers seem to have more things to worry about other than lung cancer and cardiovascular problems, is it? They have quite some things to worry about in the eyes as well. Dry eyes, meibomian gland dysfunction, meibomian gland loss. So I will definitely be looking for the effects of smoking and dry eye disease in my clinical practice as well. Maybe I think our participants might also have learned something from you, and will be utilizing your knowledge in our clinical practice as well.
In cases of ocular surface disorder where they have complaints of dry eyes, mevography and smoking can be considered in our clinical practice too.
The history of smoking can be obviously correlated with the dry eye symptoms, and we can correlate it with the mevography findings as well. So it was quite thoughtful. So this similar thought process might be going on among our participants as well. That is the beauty of clinical researches, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Thank you again. It was wonderful having you here. So
thank you, Rai.
Welcome. You're welcome. So next up we have Miss Anita Paudel. Are you here with us?
Anita is ready with her presentation.
So who is it speaking?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Hello, Miss Anita. Warm greetings and welcome to our conference.
It's me, Anita.
So we are looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you.
The podium is all yours. You can share your screen now. And for our participants, he is going to be presenting on topic quantification of metamorphopsia using MCHART among patients with macular diseases. So you can begin now.
Is it visible?
Yes, it is visible now. I guess it is being visible. Yes, it is visible now.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. The topic of my present research topic was effectiveness of MSAT in measuring metamorphosia in maculopathy. The rationale of the study, as we know, metamorphosia is a subjective symptom associated with maculopathy, which is often difficult to quantify. We have been assessing metamorphosia using MSTAR in clinical practice, but as we know, we have this results in high false negative error. And one of the most limiting factor of the MSTAR is that it is not possible to quantify metamorphosia using MSTAR grid, using our original traditional MSTAR chart. Conversely, MSAT, which was developed by Matsumoto et al. In Japan, it is believed to be highly sensitive in detecting early metamorphosia, but evidence, enough evidence is still lacking. The aim of my study is to measure the effectiveness of MSAT in detecting metamorphosia. The study design of my research was cross-sectional, and it included 43 subjects with maculopathy and 26 control were taken. Among 43 cases of maculopathy, 11 were of diabetic macular edema, 10 were of BRPO associated with macular edema, 8 were of age-related macular degeneration, 6 were of CSR, 4 were of macular scar, and 3 was of macular hole, and similarly 1 was of pigment epithelial detachment. In mean age of the 43 subjects was 55.72 with standard deviation of plus minus 12.26, and whereas the mean age of the subjects 26 subjects were 51.69 with standard deviation of 10.05. Metamorphosia was assessed using MSTAR chart, which we are doing in our clinical practice, and similarly it was quantified using MSTAR chart. As you know, MSTAR chart is new for us. I'm going to describe some thing about MSAT. MSAT consists of the 19 dotted line with dot interval ranging from 0.2 to 0.2 degree, as we have seen here. In case of patient having metamorphosia, a straight line is seen as the curved line or distorted line, and as the straight line is replaced with dotted line and dot interval changes from fine to coarse, the metamorphosia decreases, and finally the patient sees the dotted line as straight line. Here in the example, you can see this, for example, this patient has the metamorphosia, and this is a straight line as distorted line, and as the dot interval are increasing, distortion decreases, and finally when the dot interval is 0.4 degree, the metamorphosia is completely disappear, and therefore for this patient the vertical metamorphosia is written at 0.4 degree. And we can with MSAT we can measure vertical metamorphosia and horizontal metamorphosia, which is a good aspect of this chart. And in this case, this is the vertical metamorphosia. The MSAT can be rotated 90 degree, and similarly horizontal metamorphosia can be measured, and the procedure are same as this. And MSAT, actually there are two types of MSAT. First one consisting of single dotted line that passes through the fixation point. Here in the middle we can see the fixation point, and the length of this line is 20 degree, and the dotted line are of 0.1 degree, and the fixation is 0.3 degree. And the second type of MSAT is actually used for the patient with central ecotoma, like in the case of macular hole. The results of my study was the rate of detection of metamorphosia in macular disease using MSAT was 73.7%, which was the sensitivity, and the specificity of the MSAT was 100%. And using MSAT grid, the sensitivity was 55.8%. As you can see, there is a huge difference in sensitivity between the MSAT and MSAT grid and MSAT. This table shows the result of the fundus examination. Here the positive and negative means the presence and absence of maculopathy. This shows that this 100% shows the true negative rate, which is fundus examination also revealed negative metamorphosia, not present of metamorphosia, and the MSAT was negative. And 76.7% was the case where there was fundus maculopathy, as well as MSAT resulted in positive test. Using the test of Amsler grid as standard, odds ratio of MCHART was found to be 2.6%, 2.6, which means that the odds of detecting metamorphosia using MCHART is 2.6 times the odds of detecting metamorphosia using Amsler grid, with a confidence interval of 95%, and lower limit was 1.03 and upper limit was 6.6 with p-value of less than 0.03. This is the table showing the result of Amsler grid test and MCHART. Interestingly, we found that horizontal metamorphosia was positively correlated with best corrected visual acuity, and the beta coefficient was found to be 0.325 with p-value of less than 0.07, whereas the horizontal metamorphosia was not correlated with visual acuity. Here, this graph shows the scatter plot is a scatter plot diagram, which is showing the regression line between the vertical and the horizontal metamorphosia, where the variance between the vertical and horizontal metamorphosia is 0.24. Overall, we can conclude that we found MCHART to be much superior to Amsler grid in detecting metamorphosia in macular disease. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Paudel. As you have talked in great details about the effectiveness of MCHART in detecting metamorphosia in maculopathy, you have also compared it with the gold standard of our clinical practice, that is Amsler grid. And according to your findings, I believe that was MCHART was having 2.6 times better odds at predicting maculopathy than Amsler grid. That is an indeed very interesting finding. The MCHART that is very rarely used in our clinical practice. This finding of your research will instigate our participants to use MCHART in our clinical practice as well. Maybe it has encouraged us to use this tool at our disposal in our clinical practice. And one thing I'd like to comment, that you have very good demonstration of your research findings. It was very good analysis and good presentation. Thank you again, Ms. Anita. So next up, we have Mr. Bipin Koirala.
Thank you.
Bipin Koirala will be sharing about the quality of life in Nepalese patients with keratoconus, which I believe is a growing concern and a hot cake among the Nepalese young patient, which is a major concerning issue. So let's hear from Mr. Koirala. Koirala, are you here with us? Mr. Bipin, are you here with us? Hello. Your sound is not audible to us. Maybe you can unmute yourself.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you now.
Sorry for some technical issues.
Okay, that's fine. You can go on with your presentation. The podium is all yours now, Bipin. Okay.
Respected all the audiences, the organizing team, I would like to express my special thanks to all the organizing committee, my guides Sanjeev Kumar Mishra sir, Minu Chaudhary ma'am, Neeraj Dev Joshi sir, for their valuable guidance. The topic of my research is quality of life in Nepalese patients with keratoconus. Our moderator has already explained, it's a hot cake among most of the young Nepalese keratoconus patients, and this research hasn't been carried out in Nepalese patient till date. So I think this is an hot issue. As we know that keratoconus is a bilateral, slowly progressive, non-inflammatory corneal disorder characterized by anterior corneal protrusion and thinning of central stroma. It is a corneal disorder in which the central portion of the cornea becomes thinner and bulges forward in the cone-shaped fashion, and resulting in myopia, irregular astigmatism, and eventually the visual impairment. Now coming on talking about the quality of life, measuring quality of life is particularly important in keratoconus because it has an early onset of disease, onset usually at the late puberty, and in progressive, and it is a progressive and chronic in nature. And is associated with frequent change in refractive prescriptions, can cause serious vision impairment, and typically requires treatment of keratoconus is unique among chronic eye diseases as its onset is early in the median age of 25. Keratoconus, being a chronic disease with extremely long duration, affects people during their prime earning and child rearing years. Consequently, modest deficit experienced by keratoconus patients can result in disproportionate impact on quality of life and social burden that has not been recognized previously by an individual. The expected lifetime cost of a treatment of keratoconus depends on a significant cost to the patients, combined with significantly impaired vision-related quality of life and the relatively young onset of disease. The economic burden of the treatment of keratoconus represents a significant public health concern and is a major factor to reduce the quality of life of a person. The objective of my study was to evaluate the visual status and vision-related quality of life in Nepalese patients with keratoconus using a National Eye Institute Visual Function Questionnaire 25th version. The material and methodology of my research was as follows. It was a hospital-based descriptive cross-sectional study. Patients diagnosed with keratoconus at any stages were included or recruited for the keratoconus group, whereas it was a case control study. A healthy immetropes, that is age and sex matched control group was chosen for this study. And finally, coming on to the number of participants, it was 35 keratoconus subjects and 38 age and sex matched control group were enrolled. Now, discussing about materials and methodology used in my study, we used a logMAR visual acuity chart for measuring distance acuity. Similarly, we used failure option contrast sensitivity chart. We used autorefractometer in Nippon. Similarly, bone series corner topography along with aberrometry was used to diagnose the keratoconus as well as to quantify the various corneal topography parameters used during the study. Similarly, for measuring the quality of life and quantifying them, National Eye Institute Vision Function Questionnaire 25 NAVFQ was used during the study. And to remind you kindly, we used English version of the NAVFQ questionnaire. Now coming on to the result, the mean score of all sub-scales, there was 12 sub-scales in the NAVFQ questionnaire that includes general vision, general health, ocular pain, near activities, distance activities, and this and so on. And this type of sub-scales were calculated, and the mean now while talking about the composite quality of life, the composite quality of life is I think there is some issues with audios. The composite quality of life score for the keratoconus group was 66.67 with the standard deviation of 8.63, and whereas for the control group it was 93.65 with the standard deviation of 2.39, and the significance was below 0.01, which shows there was a significant difference in composite quality of life score between keratoconus group and the control group, and it was a significant reduction. Now coming on to the comparison of various sub-scales. Now, while comparing the general health sub-scale between the keratoconus and control, the lower trend line is showing the quality of life sub-scales reading for keratoconus group, whereas the upper dotted line is for the control group. The general health score was 80 for the control group, and the general health score was 72. There was a significant reduction in general vision score among keratoconic. Similarly, there was a significant reduction in the ocular pain score too. The near activity score was also difficult for keratoconus, and there was a significant difficulty in near activity. Here we can see a significant difference, that is 97 score for the control group, whereas 62 was for the keratoconus, and so on. While proceeding, the final one is the overall composite score. It was 93 for the recruitment in a control group, whereas it was 66 for the keratoconus group. Similarly, in our research, we also found that along with the progression of the disease, as the disease progresses towards the severity, the mean composite score, that is overall quality of life score, also gradually reduces. And in the left side, we can see the grade of keratoconus in better eye and its mean composite score. So the grade of both eye was rated with the mean composite score. Now coming on to the comparison of quality of life score between spectacle users and contact lens users, and we also found that the quality of life in the contact lens user was comparatively lower than that of spectacle users in Nepalese patients. I think there might be some reasons, and then we will be discussing this part on the discussion session. Now coming on to discussion, in the similar research done by Korna et al. In 2014, they found a significant difference in mean score of general health score, general vision score, ocular pain score, near vision score, mental health score, role difficulty score of NABSQ, along with the composite score between the keratoconus subject, which p value less than 0.01, which gives a clear evidence in support of findings. Similarly, Rostai et al. 2018, in a similar study, found significant difference in mean score of 11 subscales and composite score of NABSQ between case control group and the keratoconus group, which p value less than 0.01, except the mean score of color vision were not significantly correlated. Now coming on to our study, high contrast visual acuity of both better and worse eye of keratoconus subject had an statistically significant and negative correlation with the score of all the subscales of quality of life, along with the composite score too. That is, along with the increment in the quality high contrast visual acuity of better eye, there was increment in the quality of life score too. Similarly, correlating with the contrast sensitivity, there was a significant positive correlation with the quality of life scales. Now coming on to high order aberration in both better and worse eye of the keratoconus subject had a high as well as significant negative correlation with all the subscales of quality of life, along with the composite scores too. In our study, the large differences in the scales that measure the visual function, that is distance and near activity score, and in the mental health score and the role difficulty score were very informative. This finding indicates that keratoconus patients perceive a loss of function disproportionate to the reflected by the clinical measures such as visual acuity. Most importantly, this loss of function may lead to the perceived impairment in the ability to perform social duties reflected in mental health and role difficulty scores. The irregular myopic astigmatism, steepening of the corneal curvature, along with the significant rise in total high order aberration, which especially includes coma, trefoil, was most probable cause of reduced high contrast visual acuity, low contrast visual acuity, contrast sensitivity in the keratoconus. Ultimately, it deteriorates the vision quality at an early productive age of an individual. In contrast with other studies, in our study, we found decrement in quality of life among all subscales and composite score in contact lens user as compared with the spectacle user. The mean score of ocular pain scale and the composite score were significantly lower in the contact lens user than the spectacle user, which p value less than 0.01. Contraindicated finding of reduced quality of life in Nepalese keratoconus contact lens user than the spectacle user might be due to small sample size of contact lens user taken in our study. Moreover, most of the Nepalese keratoconus patients usually wear contact lens. Only after the significant reduction in the visual acuity below functional level, that is only after reaching the advanced severe keratoconus stage. And all 5 contact lens users recruited in our study were in advanced stage of keratoconus, as a result of which we obtained reduced quality of life score in the contact lens user than the spectacle user. Similarly, the 5 contact lens users who were using the contact lens recruited in our study were wearing the traditional RGB lens, and they were not wearing the new designs like rose-K design, scleral lenses, and so on. So this might be the reason, that is the use of traditional RGB might be the reason of reduced, that is lower quality of life score in the contact lens group of keratoconus patients. No, so finally concluding with the discussion, the limitation of my study was the English version of NAVSC questionnaire was being used. Similarly, the changing quality of life in subsequent follow-up was not measured, as it was a cross-sectional study. Now limitation regarding questionnaire. The keratoconus outcome research questionnaire is only validated keratoconus specific questionnaire and had most superior psychometric properties and found to be more reliable predictor of vision-related quality of life as compared to the NAVSQ score. So it would have been better to use RQ questionnaire over NAVSQ. So I kept this as my limitations. Now, finally concluding with my study, this study concluded that the quality of life of keratoconus individual was found to reduce gradually as the severity of disease increased. So, by necessary interventions and stopping the progression of disease, we can maintain the functional vision as well as we can improve the vision related quality of life score. So our study findings suggested that the vision and the vision function parameter in the better eye is the most important parameter affecting vision related quality of life in patients with keratoconus. Now, keratoconus patients should maintain their best vision that they can have to improve or to keep their quality of life score as high as possible. So, as a clinician, I think we must try to keep the visual acuity of better eye as improved as possible, as best as possible, with necessary measures. It might be either collagen cross-linking, or it might be with a better design of contact lenses, so that we can ultimately improve the quality of life score, and hence we can improve the healthy living of an individual of Nepalese keratoconus patient. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Koirala, for highlighting the burden of keratoconus among the Nepalese population and its crippling effects on the quality of life of patient. As we all know, Nepalese patients suffering from keratoconus do suffer a great deal of difficulties in their daily lives that you have highlighted in your presentation. And one thing that I'd like to highlight more from your presentation was that quality of life being low on contact lenses pay users compared to the spectacle users. That might be because, as you have said, that the small number of sample size might be a major causative factor, and also them being in the later stage of disease might be another factor. I would like to stress is that the fitting of contact lenses and RGP contact lenses in our practice we also need to uplift the type of fitting patterns, as we regularly deal with ill-fitted lenses in our clinical practice. So this presentation of yours, I believe, might have provoked our participants to take up a specialty contact lens practice as their specialization to contribute to uplift the standards of Nepalese keratoconus patients. I believe this is a great step ahead in the keratoconus field in Nepal. Thank you again, Mr. Koirala, for sharing your insightful thoughts with us. So
thank you, moderator Sandeep Kondel sir, and all the organizing committee for giving us this valuable chance and golden opportunity for an undergraduate student like me. I think it's a great platform for all of us, and it is a greater step that it will be a cornerstone to uplift the optometry education in Nepal. And thank you.
Okay, thank you again. So we'll be moving ahead with our program. You can now turn off your video. Yes, that's great. So coming up next is Miss Janisa Bhattrai. She will be presenting on topic choroidal thickness in patients with keratoconus. So is Miss Janisa here with us? Are you here? We joined with us, Miss Bhattrai?
Yes, is my screen visible? Is
No,
my
not yet.
screen visible?
Not yet. So we are looking forward to hearing from you. So now you can share your screen and begin your presentation.
Is it visible?
You are visible, not your presentation.
Is it visible? Okay. Good afternoon.
Your presentation
visible?
is not visible, just you are visible. Yes, your screen is now visible.
Is it visible now?
Yes, you can present now.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's my great pleasure to share my research among you all. The topic of my research is measurement of corneal thickness and subfoveal choroidal thickness in patients with keratoconus. Keratoconus is classically defined as progressive non-inflammatory corneal disorder characterized by anterior corneal protrusion and thinning of cornea. But the etiology of keratoconus still remains an enigma. Confusion exists to the etiology, heredity, pathogenesis, pathology, and biochemistry of the keratoconus. Treatment till now has been limited till spectacle correction or corneal cross-linking, but the treatment targeting its main etiology has not been developed yet. Keratoconus is frequently found to be associated with some systemic as well as ocular conditions like Down syndrome, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, retinitis pigmentosa, central serous retinopathy, asthma, eye rubbing, and connective tissue disorders that includes Marfan syndrome and pseudoxanthoma elasticum. So there is a great possibility that though the vivid signs and changes occur in cornea, keratoconus involves all the ocular and systemic changes as well. Choroidal thickness is altered in ocular conditions like uveitis, Vogt Koyanagi-Harada that involves ocular as well as systemic changes. So the main aim of my study was to compare the mean subfoveal choroidal thickness value and minimum corneal thickness value between normal and keratoconus subjects and correlate the baseline characteristics of cornea with the mean subfoveal choroidal thickness to compare choroidal thickness value in different stages of keratoconus. It was a hospital-based cross-sectional and non-interventional study. 32 emmetropic and 50 keratoconic eyes were involved. Different components of corneal topography was measured using bone series corneal topography machine, and choroidal thickness was measured using STOCT imaging by spectralis. This figure here shows the corneal topography report of a keratoconus subject. All the keratoconus compatible cases were classified into different stages according to Amsler-Krümer classification system. Average SIMK value and thinnest corneal thickness were correlated with mean choroidal thickness value. CMK value less than 48 diopter, myopia and astigmatism less than 5 diopter with eccentric stiffening were classified as stage 1. Mean CMK value less than 53 diopter and minimum corneal thickness greater than 400 micrometer was classified as a stage 2. Mean K value greater than 53 diopter and minimum corneal thickness less than 400 micrometer was classified as a stage 3, and mean K value greater than 55 diopter and minimum corneal thickness less than 300 micrometer was classified as stage 4. So subfoveal choroidal thickness was measured using STOCT imaging by Spectralis Heidelberg Engineering Germany version 1.3. Choroidal thickness was measured using EDI scans in the central subfield region, which is a diameter of 1 millimeter around the fovea using RT-map analysis protocol from ETDRS. All images were taken in our routine clinics from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. to avoid possible diurnal variations in choroidal thickness. The subfoveal choroidal thickness in the enhanced images were measured as perpendicular distance between the outer portion of hyperreflective line corresponding to the RP layer and hyperreflective line or margin corresponding to corneoscleral interface as shown in figure. Coming to my results, all the variables, namely mean value of average corneal curvature, thinnest corneal thickness, and cylinder in keratoconus subjects was found to be significantly different from that of normal subjects at p-value less than 0.05. So here we can see the statistically significant difference in corneal thickness, corneal curvature, choroidal thickness, and cylinder value among keratoconus and normal subjects, whereas axial length, the difference of axial length between keratoconus and normal were not statistically significant. The figure here shows the increase in choroidal thickness as the severity of keratoconus increases. The mean choroidal thickness was found to increase with the increase in stages of keratoconus. Coming to discussion, in keratoconic eyes, there are histopathological changes in corneal extracellular matrix protein and collagen types, particularly collagen type 1. Collagen type 1 is also the main component of media and adventitia of vessels wall in whole human body. Changes in collagen fiber pattern affect size of blood vessels and hence alters choroidal thickness. Another possible mechanism related to choroidal thickness increase in keratoconic eyes may be inflammatory changes. Reduction in corneal sensitivity, increase in inflammatory levels in impression cytology, in eyes with keratoconus indicate that inflammatory process play a role in pathogenesis of keratoconus. Vascular dilation and stromal infiltration at the level of choroidal stroma are both thought to be responsible for choroidal thickness increase in inflammatory disease. So I want to conclude that determination of choroidal thickness may help us to better understand and manage the keratoconus disease. Choroidal thickness may be a potential new marker for disease activity in keratoconus. Now, recommendations. The main mechanism of the increase in choroidal thickness still remains unknown. Further research is needed to understand and explain the possible mechanisms responsible for choroidal thickness changes in keratoconus patients. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bhatrai, for your insightful thoughts about adding new dimension of choroidal thickness measurement in the diagnosis and management plan of keratoconus. Indeed, the study about the choroidal thickness will add a new layer to understanding of our keratoconus disease, and it will further benefit us in our clinical practice. I believe it was a insightful presentation for our participants as well. Thank you again. So, moving ahead, next up we have Mr. Kamal Little, who will be discussing about retinal changes in type 2 diabetic patients without diabetic retinopathy. Mr. Kamal, are you here with us? Mr. Kamal Little, are you here with us? Hello, can you hear me? You are not audible. Sorry, I can't hear you.
Now, do you hear?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
I can hear you now.
Let me share my.
Yes, you can share your presentation now.
My, okay, sure. Just a second.
Okay, you can take the time. Yes, your screen is visible now. So go on with the presentation.
Do you see my? Excuse me.
Yes,
Sandeep,
I can see your screen.
Sandeep sir. Thank you. Okay. Okay.
So you can go ahead with your presentation. You are audible and your screen is also visible.
Thank you so much, Sandeep. Good afternoon, everyone. It's me, Kamal Little, and now I will be talking about retinal changes in type 2 diabetic patient without diabetic retinopathy. Here, diabetic retinopathy is a sight-threatening disease, and it is the leading cause of blindness around the world. Diabetic retinopathy is primarily considered as a vascular disease, but recent studies have found that neurodegeneration goes prior to the microangiopathy. The main aim of our study was to detect central retinal and peripapillary RNFL thickness change in diabetic patient without diabetic retinopathy. The methods and the variables used in our study are: the study design was cross-sectional, case control, and non-interventional. The study population was 35 type 2 diabetic mellitus patient without diabetic retinopathy, and 35 healthy controls were enrolled in the study. The peripapillary thickness measured by using spectral domain OCT. central thickness measurement. The central thickness measurement was done using Heidelberg Spectralis spectral domain OCT machine. We can see the macular thickness profile, and it was divided into 9 regions according to the ETDRS map with 3 concentric measuring 1 mm, 10 mm, and 6 mm. And peripheral thickness profile here, we measured the peripheral thickness profile. The circle of 3.5 mm diameter scan was used, and it was intranasal, inferotemporal, temporal, and superiotemporal, as well as resolutions. What our results find that the total thickness was used diabetes patient in ovular 0.05. Here we can see the renal thickness of diabetic patient was
We seem to have a small technical glitch with Mr. Kamal's presentation. Kamal, are you back live now? Kamal, can you hear me? Seems like his internet connection has been interrupted. So without Kamal, are you here? Mr. Kamal. Sorry for the technical glitch, participants. We are trying to connect again soon. Kapil, can you try to connect with Mr. Kamal and
Yes.
ask about the update of status?
Okay. Yes, we can hear you,
Yes,
Kamal, now.
he seems to be back. He seems to be back. Kamal? No. So should we go forward with the next presenter, or are we going to wait?
I'm ready, sir.
So I think we have to move forward with the next presenter. Next presenter is Mr. Manoj Mahat, who is going to present on topic evaluation of pattern BP in patients with hypothyroidism. Hello, Mr. Manoj Mahat.
Hello, sir.
Warm greetings and welcome to our virtual conference. We are looking forward to hearing from you. The podium is all yours. You can begin your presentation now. Best of luck.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to thank Mirabai Foundation for providing me this opportunity to present in this virtual conference. I'd like to thank Dr. Kulsum Bahadur Seth, Dr. Pragati Gautam, and Mr. Niraj Joshi for guiding me throughout my study. So it's me, Manoj Mahat, presenting you the topic evaluation of visual evoked potential parameters in patients with hypothyroidism. So thyroid disease are multi-organ endocrine disease that lead to metabolic defects in eye, brain, nerves, and others. Hypothyroidism, one of the most common thyroid disorders, leads to a wide range of disturbance in both central and peripheral nervous system, including somnolence, lethargy, depression, weakness, and postural imbalance. VEP, visual evoked potential, are commonly used in ophthalmology to evaluate bioelectric functions of visual pathways from retina to higher cortical visual pathways. It provides important diagnostic and prognostic information regarding the functional integrity of the visual system. So this study discusses the effects of hypothyroidism in visual conduction that help to know the progression to neurological function defects affecting the visual transmission and affecting the quality of life. So the objective of my study was to compare the visual evoked potential parameters between the hypothyroid disorder patient and with age and sex match controls. Moving on to materials and methodology, it was hospital-based, cross-sectional, and comparative study, which includes 30 patients with biochemical evidence of hypothyroidism and 30 controls in the endocrinology OPD of Tribhuvan University Teaching Hospital and Divya Alliance Center for Ophthalmic Studies in the duration of 1 year. So the inclusion criteria were 18 to 60 years,
and 30 hypothyroid patients with biochemical evidence of hypothyroidism, which includes 15 as subclinical or mild hypothyroidism, and 15 patients with overt or clinical hypothyroidism, and 30 patients were age and sex matched healthy group with no history of any disease as a control group. The exclusion criteria was patients older than 60 years old. It was believed that the older patients have age as a factor to affect the BP parameters, so the patients over 60 years were excluded from my study. And any neurological or system metabolic disease that has central nervous system like diabetes, mellitus, Parkinson's disease were excluded from my study. And patients receiving any drug affecting BP like ethambutol, etc., were excluded. Secondly, hypothyroidism due to causes like thyroidectomy, drugs, etc., were also excluded. And last, patients not willing to participate in the study were also excluded from my study. Moving on to recordings, pattern reversal BP was recorded with Ronald Reddy scan using program report following the International Society of Clinical Electrophysiology of Vision guidelines. Monocular pattern BP was performed under older people condition. Two pattern sex size were used, 1 degree and 0.25 degree, and latency P100 and amplitude and size value P100 were measured. So moving on to the results, the mean age of hypothyroid patient was 38.94 and the mean age of normal control was 38.52, and the mean values of free triiodothyronine FT3 was 10.15, T4 was F5.35, and TSS was of P100 wave at 60 minutes was recorded to be 111.34 in the right eye and 111.53 in the left eye, whereas 112.82 in the right eye and 113.05 in the left eye for small sex size. So one-way ANOVA test where the means between the different groups of hypothyroidism with control and found that significant relation was statistical significant result was observed in case of latencies in both sex size 1 degree and 0.25 degree, and post-hoc P value was also observed to confirm the contribution of overt and subclinical hypothyroidism to these differences. And Pearson correlation was used to compare the relation between the VB parameter with the thyroid stimulating hormone, which found the significant correlation with positive correlation in case of TSS and latencies and negative correlation in case of T4 and T3 with the latencies. So moving on to discussion. Worldwide to check the functional integrity of the visual pathway. The evidence of visual pathway abnormalities in the central nervous system involvement can expand the knowledge of electrophysiological influence on hypothyroidism on the nervous system. Analysis of pattern VP response may provide the early diagnosis of such neurological changes, providing the subclinical evidence of visual dysfunction, which might help in avoiding the development of neuropathy. Inconsistent with our study, Tamoy et al., Masteledge et al., and Huang et al. Found abnormal prolonged latency in the hypothyroid patients. So this is the figure showing the BP reports of the control, and this shows the control result, and this shows the hypothyroid patient where there is significant increase in latency in case of hypothyroid patients. So additionally, we have observed positive correlation between the pattern VP latency with TSS values of the patient, while negative correlation between the pattern VP latencies with free thyroxine and free triiodothyronine values of the patient. So all these values were found to be statistically significant with p value less than 0.05. So the limitation of our study was like it was the study groups consisted of OPD patients of BP and endocrinology OPD, so they do not truly reflect the exact prevalence in the community. Generalization of findings of the study was limited due to small sample size, and also longitudinal study is required to throw out more light on the time taken for the hypothyroid patient to manifest all these detectable neurological variations. The conclusion from this study, it can be concluded that hypothyroid patients have significant delayed P100 wave latency and reduced amplitudes for both sex size in comparison to age and gender matched normal subjects. Similarly, there was statistically significant positive correlation between TSS and latency for both sex sizes. Furthermore, there was statistically significant negative correlation between T4 and T3 with latency and universal symptoms. With conclusion, I'd like to conclude my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mahat, for such an eloquent presentation. As you highlighted about the importance of pattern BP in detecting the changes in visual system due to hypothyroidism in absence of other neurological and ophthalmological symptoms, I believe your findings are of great clinical importance for all the practicing clinical optometrists at the tertiary level eye hospital. Thank you again.
Thank you, sir.
And I would like to also remind our participants that our platinum sponsor Vaishnav Medicals is also a dealer of electrophysiological equipments in Nepal. If you'd like to set up an electrophysiological setup, you can feel free to contact with them. So once again, thank you, Manoj. So let's go move ahead with our presentation. I would like to call upon Mr. Kamal, whose connection was lost while presenting before. Is Kamal here?
Yes, Sandeep sir. Yes, Sandeep sir.
Yes.
I'm here.
So you can continue your presentation from you had left. You can provide a brief background for our participants about the presentation that you already did, and you can begin from the slide that you had in which the internet disconnected. Okay, you can go ahead, Kamal. Share your screen and begin the presentation.
Okay, sorry for the inconveniences. Once again, good afternoon, everyone. Let me share my screen. Are you seeing my screen?
Not yet.
Okay.
Yes, your screen is visible now.
Do you see?
Yes, I can see your screen. You are also audible. You can go ahead with the presentation now.
Sandeep sir, do you see my presentation?
Yes, I can see your presentation. You are on the results slide. So you can begin your presentation. Provide a brief background of your study.
Okay.
So that our participants can get motivated, can get coherent.
The aim of the aim of our study was to detect the central retinal and peripapillary RNFL thickness changes in diabetic mellitus patient without diabetic retinopathy. Here, we used 35 diabetic type 2 diabetic mellitus patient without diabetic retinopathy, and 35 healthy controls were enrolled, and the central retinal and peripapillary RNFL thickness was measured by using spectral domain OCT machine. Now we measure the central retinal thickness using Heidelberg Spectralis spectral domain OCT. Likewise, peripapillary RNFL thickness was also measured by using Heidelberg Spectralis machine. Results, here we found the total retinal thickness was significantly reduced in diabetic mellitus patient without diabetic retinopathy in all the subfields of perifoveolar area except outer inferior with the significance value less than 0.05. Here we can see the central retinal thickness in diabetic patient who had no diabetic retinopathy was 245.74 micrometer with standard deviation 21.62, and here we can see in control population the thickness was quite larger, that is 264.11 with standard deviation 18.14, and likewise we can see in the temporal and the inferotemporal sector of the RNFL was also significantly reduced in type 2 diabetic mellitus patient who had no diabetic retinopathy as compared to the normal, and the significance value was less than P-value was less than 0.05. Now, here in discussion, many studies have found that in diabetic patients, there is alternation in both retinal function test as well as electroretinogram significantly. These findings only be explained and satisfied by neuroretinal degeneration. And hence, our study suggests that neuroretinal degeneration occurs prior to the retinal vasculopathy in diabetic mellitus patient without diabetic retinopathy. And thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kamal. It was an interesting presentation. You're finding that neuroretinal changes come before the vascular changes in diabetes was indeed an interesting finding for us. Our participants I believe have also enjoyed your presentation. It has definitely added to the basic understanding of ocular pathology related to the type 2 diabetes mellitus. Thank you again, Mr. Kamal, for such a wonderful presentation.
Thank you so much, Sandeep sir, and thank you, Mero Eye Foundation and Advanced Optometry in the group.
Okay, thank you. You're welcome. Okay, so let's move ahead with our schedule. Coming up next is Ms. Sabina Khatun. She will be discussing about the effects of cycloplegia on ocular biometry parameters and refractive status. So, hello, Ms. Khatun, are you here with us? Ms. Khatun, can you hear me?
Yes, Mr. Sandeep, I am here.
Okay, so
Yes, Mr.
warm
Sandeep, I am
greetings.
here. Is my slide?
Okay, you can go ahead with your presentation. So, the podium is all yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. At first, I would like to show my gratitude to the Mero Eye team for providing this opportunity. So I will be discussing about my project topic, which is effect of installation of 1% tropicamide on anterior segment parameters and refractive state.
Yes, your screen is visible. You can go ahead with your presentation.
There is a technical issue.
Regarding what?
Sorry, there is a technical issue right now. Can we continue after a minute of 5?
Okay, there seems to have been a technical issue with Ms. Sabina Khatun. So we are going to move ahead with next presenter. She is Ms. Srijana Lamichhane. So are you back live?
Is our screen visible now?
Yes,
No.
it is. Yes, it is. It is visible. So, Ms. Sabina, please fix your technical issue.
Okay. Sandeep sir, I'm ready here.
Okay. Miss Sabina. Wait. Miss Sabina? Hello. Miss Khatun.
Yes, I'm
so
here.
Please fix your technical issue. We are going to move ahead with the next presenters, that is Miss Srijana, and you will be presenting after her. Okay, is that okay with you? Is that okay with you? Okay, seems like she is okay with it. So we are going to move ahead with our next presenter, that is Miss Srijana Lamichhane. She will be discussing about the topic measurement of central corneal thickness, central macular thickness, and soft foveal choroidal thickness in SLA B27 positive patients with and without uveitis. Okay, so Miss Srijana, you can go ahead with your presentation. The podium is all yours now.
Okay, thank you, Sandeep sir. So here I would like to thank Mero Eye Foundation for giving this opportunity for us undergraduate students to present our research topic. The topic of my presentation is measurement of central corneal thickness, central macular thickness, and subfoveal choroidal thickness in epilepticus symptomatic patients. I'd like to thank Dr. Ranjit Khalsitola, Mr. Sanjeev Kumar Mishra, and Dr. Sanjeev Bhakkar for guiding me throughout my study. Moving on to the introduction, SLB27 is a trans-surface antigen encoded by the B locus in the major histocompatibility complex on chromosome 6 and presents antigenic peptides derived from cells and non-cells antigens to the T cells. SLB27 is strongly associated with encapsulating spondylitis and other associated inflammatory disease referred to as the spondyloarthropathies. Seronegative spondyloarthropathies are unequivocally related to the extra-articular features. The most common symptomatic association is SLB27-associated anterior uveitis. Anterior uveitis was the most common form of manifestation, accounting for approximately 61.8% of all cases in the Nepalese population. The prevalence of SLB27 in patients with acute anterior uveitis is about 50% in the range of 19 to 88% across different racial groups. Although anterior uveitis is defined as inflammation of iris and ciliary body, the recent studies have reported that there is involvement of posterior segment too. Over 65% of SLB27 positive acute anterior uveitis patients suffer an ocular complication of uveitis and have significant posterior segment complications with reported frequencies of between 17 to 25%. Choroidal and retinal thickness might be a useful biomarker in monitoring posterior involvement of the patient with the acute anterior uveitis. The main objective of my study is to compare the central corneal thickness, central macular thickness, and subfoveal choroidal thickness in SLB27 positive patients with and without uveitis. Moving on to the materials and methodology, it was a hospital-based cross-sectional non-interventional study. The 60 eyes of SLB27 positive patients with unilateral acute anterior uveitis and 16 eyes of SLB27 positive patients without uveitis attending the BP Koirala Alliance Center for Ophthalmic Studies and Hematology OPD of PUTS was selected for this study in the duration of 1 year. The patients were further subdivided into 3 groups. The group 1 consists of the patients who have the unilateral acute anterior uveitis, which is named as affected eyes. The group 2 consists of 30 fellow unaffected eyes, group named as unaffected fellow eyes, and the group 3 consists of the 16 eyes of SLB27 positive patients without uveitis, named as unaffected healthy eyes. Corneal thickness was measured with the bone serous corneal topographer and tomographer, and the macular thickness and the subfoveal choroidal thickness was measured with the Spectralis spectral domain optical coherence tomography device, Heidelberg Engineering, the software version of 6.0. The inclusion criteria was all the patients diagnosed with SLB27 positive antigen, irrespective of presence or absence of uveitis, acute onset fresh cases of SLB27 positive, acute anterior uveitis without intervention. The exclusion criteria consists of the patients with spondyloarthropathy other than SLB27, patients with media opacities obscuring the view to evaluate the central macular thickness or the central subfoveal choroidal thickness, patients associated with glaucoma except SLB27 uveitis induced secondary glaucoma, corneal disease, retinal disease, and refractive surgery, patients with high spherical errors greater than or equal to 6.6 diopters and the contact lens wearers, patients with any suspicion of any underlying ocular and systemic disease. Moving on to the usual part of my research, the mean age of SLB27 positive patients with acute anterior uveitis was 43.27 with the standard deviation of 10.21 years, and the mean age of SLB27 positive patients without uveitis was 35.06 with the standard deviation of 10.76 years. Among 30 SLB27 patients with acute anterior uveitis, 16%, that is 53.3% were males, whereas the 46.7% were females. Similarly, in the SLB27 positive cases without uveitis, in group 3, 62.5% were males and 37.5% were females. On comparing the ocular parameters, that is central corneal thickness, central macular thickness, and subfoveal choroidal thickness between the group 1, that is affected eyes, and group 2, unaffected fellow eyes, we found a significant thickness difference between group 1 and group 2 in the central corneal thickness and subfoveal choroidal thickness, while we did not find any significant difference between group 1 and group 2 in the central macular thickness. So again, comparing these ocular parameters between group 1 and group 3 using the independent sample t test, we found central corneal thickness to be significantly different, while the remaining parameters are not significantly different. So similarly, on comparing these ocular parameters between group 2 unaffected fellow eyes and group 3 unaffected healthy eyes using the independent sample t test, we did not find any significant difference between these groups. So moving on to the discussion, the increased corneal thickness in acute anterior uveitis could be due to the endothelial dysfunction caused by the inflammation in the anterior chamber. As corneal thickness is an indicator for the endothelial pump and barrier functions, when the pump and the barrier functions of the endothelium are compromised, this leads to the hydration of cornea and thus the corneal thickness increases. In case of mild anterior chamber inflammation, changes in the choroidal and central foveal thickness are associated with the breakdown of the blood-retinal barrier. In our study, we found there is a significant increase in choroidal thickness affected eyes relative to the fellow unaffected eyes, but could not find any difference with the group 3, that is the unaffected healthy eyes. In our study, we did not find any thickness difference between group 1 and group 3. This finding might be due to the difference in the age group of majority population between group 1 and group 2, where the group 1 consists of major population ranging from 41 to 50 years, and the group 3 consists of 31 to 40 years, where there is a difference in the age group was statistically significant. This finding suggests that the need for bilateral OCT evaluation in patients with acute anterior uveitis, because the involvement of the posterior segment may be unrecognized if not compared to the unaffected fellow eyes. In our study, we did not find any statistically significant thickness differences of central corneal thickness, central macular thickness, and subfoveal choroidal thickness between group 2, that is unaffected fellow eyes, and group 3, that is unaffected healthy eyes. The major limitations of this study is the lack of automated software to measure choroidal thickness, as we don't have access to the set source OCT. The generalization of findings of this study is limited due to the small sample size. Also, a longitudinal study with subsequent follow-up could be more informative for the better understanding of the SLB27 acute anterior uveitis. Moving on to the conclusion, the central corneal thickness, the subfoveal choroidal thickness of the affected eyes were found to be significantly thicker than the fellow unaffected eyes. These findings indicate subclinical choroidal inflammations and choroidal evaluation in the diseased eye may provide information on the disease activity. In our study, macular thickness is minimally affected by the SLB27 acute anterior uveitis unless the macular edema is noticed. Investigating the changes in cornea, retina, and the choroid will not only elucidate the effect of anterior uveitis on them, but also helps us to guide or manage the disease effectively. So, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Lamisane. Your findings are indeed insightful, which indeed helped us to broaden our horizon about understanding of HLA-B27 antigen and its effects on different ocular structures. Thank you again. So I'd like to go back to Ms. Khatun. Is she available here? Have you resolved your issues with your computer or technical glitches? Okay, you can go ahead with your presentation.
Is the slide visible?
Yes, it is visible.
Is the slide visible?
Yes, it is.
Sorry for the inconvenience. So my project topic is effect of installation visible. Sorry for the inconvenience. So my project topic is effect of installation of 1% tropicamide on anterior segment parameters and refractive state. The aim of our study is to determine the changes in anterior segment parameters before and after installation of 1 drop of 1% tropicamide. So methods and methodology include, it is a hospital-based and cross-sectional study. 81 subjects were enrolled in the study. Anterior segment parameters and refractive error was measured before and after installation of 1 drop of 1% tropicamide for once. The study variables were corneal curvature, central corneal thickness, anterior chamber depth, anterior chamber angle, lens thickness, axial length, and refractive error. The study tools which were used are Zeiss IOLMaster, bone serous corneal topography, and A-scan biometry. So the results were, there was significant change in anterior chamber depth, anterior chamber angle, and central corneal thickness in refractive error. Central corneal curvature, central corneal thickness, anterior chamber depth, and anterior chamber angle all shifted positively, which was statistically and clinically significant. There was no change in other anterior segment parameters. There was hyperopic shift of refractive error after installation of 1% tropicamide. So in conclusion, it is important to consider the changes that occur in anterior chamber depth, anterior chamber angle, and central corneal thickness in the diagnosis and management of cases with glaucoma,
The change in central corneal thickness is also important for refractive surgery cases. The most interesting finding of my project was the increase in the anterior chamber angle after installation of 1% topicamide, which is a new finding, and we need to look at this interpretation. Finally, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Khatun. It was indeed interesting to learn about your study findings about increasing anterior chamber angle after the installation of topicamide. Indeed, we have to look upon it in greater depth. Your findings can prove to be very useful in our daily clinical practice. Thank you again for joining with us. So moving forward with our program, with that presentation, we have finally come to the formal end of this session. During this session, we had discussion on variety of topics of clinical optometry. I hope this session was fruitful for our participants who have continually stayed with us throughout the session. I would like to thank all the participants for their valuable time, without whose support and enthusiasm, this session and this conference as a whole wouldn't have seen the light of the day. So I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors again. Their support, I believe, has been pivotal in this conference to this grand form. After this session, we have a grand closing ceremony lined up for all of our participants. Please keep in touch with us. For that, I'd like to hand over to the moderator of our next session, Ms. Solu Gautam. Thank you, everyone, for bearing with me. With that, this is your host, Sandeep Karnil, signing off this session. Ms. Solu, are you audible? Are you available here?
Yeah, I am.
Okay, so I'd like to hand over this session to you. So go ahead.
Thank you so much, Sandeep sir. Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the third day of Advancing Optometry Education powered by Meru Eye Academy, supported by our partners, Tilganga Institute of Ophthalmology, Himalayan Eye Hospital, and Matrika Eye Care Center. And sponsored by our platinum sponsor, Vaishno Medicines Private Limited. Our gold sponsor, Topcon and Nidec. Our silver sponsor, Bausch & Lomb, and our bronze sponsor, Silverline. This is Solu Gautam signing in as your host for this Thanksgiving session of our conference AOE 2021, and I am super thrilled to have you all here today. Prior to the beginning of this Thanksgiving session, I request you all to support us throughout the session by assuring that you are completely muted throughout the session. And if you have any notes or feedback for the AOE conference, please drop them to our feedback file, which you can get in the chat box throughout the entire session. Also, I would like to express my immense gratitude towards all our presenters who took their time out of their heavy schedule to impart their invaluable insights among our audience. And at the same time, I'm also thankful to all our participants for their endurance throughout the scientific session. And lately, I cannot thank enough the Meru Eye Foundation and the team whose support fosters the optometry education globally through this conference. I hope you all enjoyed the conference and take the knowledge you learned here today to improve your lives and career. For now, I would like to move forward to inaugurate this Thanksgiving session, and joining us for this session will be Mr. Hiranath Dahal, Mr. Gauri Shrestha, and last but not the least, Mr. Kapil Gautam. So for now, I would like to hand over the session to the organizing secretary of this conference, Mr. Hiranath Dahal, who have done great efforts and hard work for bringing this conference into existence. Hello, Hira sir, are you there? So you are not audible. Can you please make sure that your audio is clear?
Yeah, so thank you, Solu. It's good to see you.
Yeah, sir, it's an immense pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us. So now the call is yours.
So finally we have concluded the conference. So again, thank you, Solu, for introducing me. So once again, thank you all for joining the conference. The 3-day sessions was actually a wonderful time. I hope it was a wonderful time for all of you who have joined. As an organizing secretary, so actually I'd like to share some moments regarding how this concept of conference went on. Actually, it was not a far time or far away that we just planned a conference. It was after the COVID-19 outbreak. So as we all know that COVID-19 has positive, most of the negative things. It frightened us, and our lifestyle was changed, and there was also some positive comments. Okay, although there was many negative comments from the COVID-19, it also made a world, a global village. Actually, we were able to connect with the persons living in the another corner of the world very easily through a virtual medium, and it was a good practice for us. Okay, so the accessibility of the resources was better to us. And regarding the things done by MeruI, immediately after the COVID-19 pandemic broke out, we initiated an online sessions with the speakers from all around the world. First once a week, then slowly we were on a busy schedule, and there was a knowledge all around, and we got a tremendous number of positive feedbacks, and that encouraged us to move a step ahead, and that encouraged us to do a more. Then we conducted an optometry education upliftment program, and that also got very much positive feedback for us. And the participation of that program was, the participants were from all around the world, and that encouraged us again to think in a broader way. That encouraged us to go a bit forward. Then we thought of why not calling all the delegates into one platform, and with a common theme discussing on the different subspecialties practice of an optometry, and especially the eye care platform. Then we have Gauri sir here in the platform, and with the discussion of MeruI team with the scientific committee chairman, our respected Gauri sir, we came with a plan of conducting or initiating or a conference. Actually, it was planned in February itself, but there was some a time we need to have some plenty of time, so it was shifted to March. And with the aim of bringing optometrists, ophthalmologists, and other eye care professionals under a unique platform to exchange their educational experience of the eye and vision care through research and innovations, we planned for this conference. Once we were all set to organize the conference on this virtual platform, we formed a different committee, organizing committee, scientific committee, IT committee, and financial committee. And I like to thank all the members of I like to thank, as an organizing secretary, I like to thank all the members of each and every committee that has worked hard to make this program success. Okay, so also I like to thank our partners for this conference, Himalayan Eye Hospital, the Tilganga Institute of Ophthalmology, and Matrika Eye Foundations for collaborating with us for the successful implementation of this program. And also I like to thank our sponsors, Vaishnav Medicines, Popcorn, Nidec, Bosch & Lomb, and also Silverline Laboratories. So 6th March, the program initiated, and there was a scientific sessions. So basically, there were the speakers were all around the world, and we got a high amount of positive feedback. So we saw some things to improve also, because the sessions were all live. There were some technical difficulties while sharing the screen, and some participants were talking a bit longer than the time frame, but that's okay. The sharing the knowledge regarding their own subspecialty practice, around 300 participants, both national and international. I guess the number may be more, because every participant has their own interest in the conference. Some were interested in the pediatrics, some were interested in the contact lens. So I hope the numbers were more participated in the 3 days conference, and although the sessions were designated for 15 to 20 minutes, some sessions was a bit long, and I hope the participants and the delegates got the answers to their queries from the respective subspecialty expert. And if anybody, I like to urge from here that if anybody has any questions with any speakers and has not got the contacting address, can please forward us any queries. Will definitely help for them to connect with the delegates from the different subspecialty experts. Okay, so with this, at last but not the least, I like to thank Kapil. I call him Bhai, Babu, Bhai. Okay, so it was oh wow, it was a very good journey, a wonderful journey with him during all these course. That this time course has been great. Conversing with him, planning with the sessions. So thank you, Kapil, for all your support for my work. And I remember those late night conversations with him, planning the conference, making the program schedule and all, and the combined work that we have done to make this program success. And not the least, I'd also like to thank all the delegates and all the speakers and all the moderators. And also thank you, the IT persons who have managed this program so successful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shira sir, for your kind words. So I totally acknowledge the fact that this conference united all the eye care professionals globally and also the hardships of each individuals for this conference. So now, moving forward, we'll be joining the scientific chair of this conference, Mr. Gauri Shrestha, who have put so much of efforts and dedication since months to bring this conference into reality. Also, he has remarkable contribution towards the entire Nepalese optometry fraternity. So let's welcome our scientific chair, Mr. Gauri Shrestha, to deliver his few words of honor. Hello, Gauri sir, are you there?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Solu, for the lovely introductions. So first of all, shall I read my message? I can read this so that I can save the time. Just let me. Yeah, okay. Can you see, is my video on?
Yeah, it is, sir.
Okay. So I just read my message so that we save the time. So as the chair of the scientific committee of AOE 2021, I would like to thank all the delegates, guests, and speakers and supporting organizations, Tilganga Institute of Ophthalmology, Himalayan Eye Hospital, and the Matriga Eye Center for making this conference remarkably successful. And the main idea of this conference is to the transfer the knowledge and skill to the upcoming young generation optometrists, and so that they become able to take the leadership in the eye care and the eye and vision care. So this is the main objective of organizing this conference, then so that they can upgrade, they understand what the changes are happening in the field of the optometry, how the research are conducted, how papers are presented, how to communicate in the research settings, how to communicate with your research findings. So all these are the main ideas behind this thing. And I just again read this message. And the 3 days have had an intense and immense learning experience. Many experienced researchers, clinicians, and scholars presented their work on a highly receptive platform. And students' presentation was one of the attractions that could promote their research communication skills. And we had several papers on anterior segments and posterior segment eye diseases, critical reviews, commentaries, investigative and specialty optometry. And I believe that they have been of highly scientific merits and evidence-based. And to make this event successful, many like-minded people have been involved and joined from the inception of the program to the present context. And to name a few, I just like to name all of our teams. So I especially acknowledge Mr. Kapil Gautam for coming up with the immense enthusiasm and having expertise in interpersonal relationships, communication, and technical piece of stuffs that we require for hosting an online virtual meeting. I'm also lucky to have a young and dynamic team with a lot of potentials and supporting me throughout day and night in all possible ways. I would like to name them like Mr. Irana Tal, Mr. Pratyush Raj Dakal, Mr. Birendra Mahat, Mr. Sandeep Kanil, Mr. Arjun Sapkota, Ms. Lamu Sherpa, Ms. Monica Mandal, Ms. Rohit Tiwari, Ms. Martha Purkit, Ms. Solu Gautam, Ms. Manaswi Karki, and Mr. Kamal Little. They have been instrumental in materializing this event to this level. And there are a few technical issues with using virtual platforms. And future upcoming conferences. I also thank our platinum sponsor Vaishnav Medicines, gold sponsors Nirex and Topcon, and silver sponsors Bosch and Lomb, and bronze sponsors Silverline for their financial support. Finally, I'm looking forward to meeting you during one of the future events of the AOE. I envision to organize a blended international conference with physical and virtual sessions together in a single platform, invigorated with an alumni sessions, honors, and award lectures. So thank you very much for your time and making this conference successful. Hope to see you all in the next conference. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gauri sir, for your great words, and we totally appreciate your efforts behind the successful organization of this conference, AOE 2021, and we hope that you come up with new ideas, creation, and innovations even in the near future to foster the optometry education nationally and internationally. Thank you so much, sir. Now we have reached to the last speech of this session, and for that we'll be joining a very special guest who have had lots of dedication for this conference and optometry education. Not only that, he also imposes a great passion in educating this generation of optometrists through his drive, hardships, effort, and hard work. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome the founder and director of MIRAI Foundation and the chairperson of this conference, Mr. Kapil Gautam. And with this, I, Solu Gautam, signing out from you all. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Solu. I hope I am audible to you, right? I'm clear?
Yeah, you are.
Thank you so much, Solu. Thank you so much, Hirasa. Thank you so much, Gaurishan. So it's been a lot. So I'm going just going through I have just prepared for my draft, and I will go through this. Before that, I want to share some experience. I mean, it's a very long journey. Actually, it took a lot from my side. And when the Gauri sir thanks to me and Hirasa thanks to me, I were wet, and I can't be more. This is everything for me. I mean, I have dedicated almost like 3 or 4 months for this conference. So I'm just trying to be brave for reading this thing, my draft, and maybe we can have our short meeting after completing this conference. So once again, thank you so much, everyone, and very good afternoon to you all. We have reached to the end of the Advancing Optometry Education 2021. Hope you all had an amazing time during the entire session of the conference, as we are on the last day of AOE conference. I feel happy and bit of disappointment at the same time. Happy for successful accomplishing the program, and disappointment to conclude the months of hardship this soon. But more than that, I'm grateful, and grateful to see all your invaluable presence, passions between your personal and professional schedule. It will also privilege and honor for me to be in trust with all the undertaking at a gathering of such eminent eye health personalities for the different part of the globe. With this kind of event, our mind has been full with a torrent of knowledge and information with a vision for the days to come. Not only that, but it's also helped to build the networking, communication, and to know the global need of eye care at the current context. I'm sure that we all have somehow benefited from this conference, and here I declare that we will be organizing similar conference every year with the motto of advancing optometry education. On the behalf of entire conference committee, I'd like to thank all the wonderful speakers, moderator, participants for the conference. Their presence has been invaluable and without any doubts has helped make the event great success. We greatly appreciate the support we have received from our platinum sponsor, Boyce Medicil, our golden sponsor, Topon and Iraq, our silver sponsor, Boss and Lom, and bronze sponsor, Silver Line, in the organizing the event. We are equally grateful to our partner, Tilganga Institute of Ophthalmology, Himalayan Eye Hospital, Matrika Eye Center, and finally, I can't fail to thank enough our organizing committee, scientific chair, Mr. Gauri Sankar Shrestha, organizing secretary, Mr. Hiranath Dahal, scientific secretary, Mr. Pratyush Takal, our committee member, Brendra Mohat, Martha, Manishi, Solu, every entire Mirai family who been numerous to name individually, but have spent their unbounded time and effort for the contribution to the program. This conference. Since Advancing Optometry Education is an annual event, we look forward to see you all again in 2022 in a new emerging topic of discussion and idea that will ultimately help advancing optometry education. With these few words, it's an honor and pleasure for me to declare the conference Advancing Optometry Education been officially closed. Thank you so much. All right, so look, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So can you announce the close of our session, and we will be ending our session.
Thank you. With this, we are now officially closed for the Advancing Optometry Education Conference 2021. Hoping to see you all again next year. Stay safe, stay connected. Thank you. Have a good day.
BioTrue Multipurpose Solution, inspired by the biology of your eyes. BioTrue works like the eye, with unique innovations that are almost as remarkable as the eye itself. Formulated to match the pH of healthy tears, BioTrue is designed to stay in balance with your patient's eyes. Utilizes hyaluronic, the eye's natural lubricant. BioTrue forms a free-flowing network on the lens surface, drawing in water to envelop lenses in a hydrating cushion. BioTrue also features protein management,